Hi, good evening. Welcome to the Indivisible HOPE meeting for June 11th, 2020. Today we're going to talk about Black Lives Matter, racial disparities, and racial injustices in our country, and the systemic racism that's really been plaguing the nation for hundreds of years at this point. You know, systemic racism really does infect the entire structure of our society. Our schools, our court systems, our workplaces, police departments. You know, white people need to listen and learn in order to understand what they can do to break up the racial disparities in the system and make society a little better. And tonight we have with us 7 panelists, politicians, experts in the field, advocates. And as the first panelist, I want to introduce Eddie Graham.
Eddie, can you unmute yourself?
Yes,
welcome.
Thank you.
So Eddie Graham's is Township Commissioner in Springfield Township, and he's the NAACP chairperson of the Cheltenham branch's Political Action Committee. Eddie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, are you in Cheltenham right now?
Actually, I'm in Springfield Township.
That makes more sense.
Yeah. I'm vice president of the Springfield Township Commissioners Board, the first and only African-American on the board. And just wanted to once again, thank you for having me.
Yeah,
and
thanks for
also
coming.
the political action chair for the Cheltenham branch NAACP, along with being on the state political action chair committee.
And how long have you been on the township? How long have you been a township commissioner?
This will be my 6th year.
Nice. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing your take on the local issues and funding and all that kind of stuff.
Thank you.
And I saw Hakim here somewhere. Hakim, there you are. Thanks for joining us. So Hakim's a councilman in Norristown, community leader. He's done a ton of nonprofit work. You know, I know he does a lot of work with the intermediate unit. Hakim, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
And how long have you been on the council?
So I'm just starting my 2nd term, which means I just completed 4 years, and I'm starting up my 2nd term of 4 years. So a little bit.
And you decided to come back?
Yeah. I'm a believer
didn't scare
that.
you away?
Yeah, nah. I feel like if you got to start something, you have to finish it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And we also have Chief Medwid, Lower Salford Police Department. They are. Chief, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Now, you've been chief for what, like 21 years, which means you're old enough to drink now? So 21 years, and you just keep coming back, huh?
I'm in my 38th year in law enforcement in Montgomery County. I started in Springfield, where Eddie Graham is now one of the commissioners, and was in Whitpain Township as well, and the last 21 in Lower Salford as the chief. Excellent.
Well, I appreciate you coming. I'm looking forward to getting your intake and input on all this. Intake doesn't make sense. I meant to say input. And Veronica's around here somewhere.
Hi,
I saw her.
I'm here.
There you are. Hey, Veronica. We have Veronica Moeller, who organized in like 24 or 28 hours a march and a protest in Souderton that my wife and I attended, and there were 1,100 people there. So
yeah, I keep hearing different numbers, but they keep going up. So it was incredible, the turnout.
Yeah, that's exciting. Now, what made you decide to do that?
A couple of different things. Sorry, my daughter is screaming in the background. Honestly, I acted on pure emotion, just with the recent deaths of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd, and with County Commissioner Joe Gale's statements. I had been in a really difficult place, and I had seen some things online, gotten into like a little disagreement with a former classmate, and he told me I should stop being disappointed. And I needed to channel my emotions somewhere, and I just kind of had this rash decision to start a protest, and everything kind of took off within 24 hours. So that was kind of the basic inspiration.
Yeah, it was very impressive and very well done, I would say, especially on such short notice.
Yeah, I agree. In the community, the council board members, the borough members, and the mayor and the Souderton area police everybody was so helpful and shipped in right away, and everybody was very prompt. Like everybody was ready to work and make everything run smoothly. So.
And Veronica, you don't have the best connection.
Without them.
You don't have the best connection. I don't know if you're on your Wi-Fi, if there's anywhere else you can go to get a little closer to your router. We're gonna come back to you in a minute. But that's okay. We also have with us Representative Steve Malagari, who's floating around here somewhere.
You're saying my connection.
There he is.
What's going on, everyone?
Steve, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
Now you're just finishing up your first term, and then are you wrapping it up, or is this a re-election year?
So this is a re-election year. I'll be on the ballot again in the fall. We just got through the primary, and what was great was the fact that we actually had a really good turnout, even though we have a global pandemic going on, and even though it's been a tough year to really contact individuals. We were stuck with phone calls and Zoom meetings like we are now. We were able to get roughly 1,300 more votes than my opponent for the primary election if it were a head-to-head election. So that's promising to see for November, but there's still a lot of work to do. I know
and normally
that,
I get to say, oh, sorry.
What's that? Go ahead.
I was just normally at these meetings, I get to say we're in your district, but I'm in my district and you're in your district. So you're in the 53rd district. Tell us where that is for those of us that
Yeah, so the 53rd district encompasses in the southernmost part is Lansdale Borough, and then you go into Hatfield Township, Hatfield Borough, then you go into Souderton, Telford, Franconia, and Salford Townships, all Montgomery County.
Nice. Well, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
And is Jill here? Jill Dennin? We're hoping to get her hopefully a little later. Jill's running for state representative in the 147th district. And I think our last speaker, our last panelist, Napoleon, is going to join us around 7:30. So we'll keep an eye out for him. Now, Hakim, I wanted to start with you if we could. I want to know, well, let me preface this by saying this. I don't know why Indivisible Hope keeps bringing me back. I'm Josh Camson, moderating tonight. I'm a criminal defense attorney in Montgomery County and across Pennsylvania. So that's kind of my experience that I bring to the table. And they said, oh, what would be really great for this discussion would be like if we could get a white guy. That would be just the best thing to have for tonight. So here I am. But my job tonight is really to facilitate the conversation, and I want to hear what other people have to say. Usually these events are a lot of me talking, but I tonight want to listen and I want to learn something. So with that preface, Hakim, I want to hear about the local level. I want to hear what's going on, in Norristown and what we can do at the local level to make real positive change, about racism, police brutality, etc.
Sure. Again, thank you for having me. And just to give you a little background, I'm born and raised in Norristown, 19401 zip code. I think what's unique for me now is that I actually live, work, raising my family here, and I'm serving the community in which I grew up in. I think a blessing for me, my success over the years was the fact that I was able to play sports. I was involved with music and I was involved with language at a young age, which really allowed me to see all of Montgomery County. Being in the Suburban 1 conference and playing football teams like Souderton and North Penn, I was able to see much of the county, which, to be honest with you, being from Norristown, it gave me some source of motivation as to what I wanted for my future. When I would see these homes, when I would see the neighborhoods, when I would see the large houses and things like that. So I feel that Norristown is a part of Montgomery County and has the ability to have the same opportunity. And we just happen to be a majority minority community. And I think one of the main reasons that I stay is because I believe that it can it can fall into the same graces with our other townships.
And has that been happening over the years? You know, since you've been on the council, do you think we're making some progress in that direction? And either way, how can we help that community progress? I mean, I work in Norristown, obviously as an attorney, I'm there all the time, and you know, it seems like it's making some strides, but how can we make greater strides so that when they're building the turnpike and making the exits, they're not trying to shoot past Norristown?
True. I think Norristown's headed in the right direction. And like I say, growing up in Norristown, you know, we got a stigma based on our zip code, and we got a stigma based on the levels of crime. We got a stigma as being one of the most dangerous places in Montgomery County. But I think just working on our police department alone, bringing in Chief Talbot from Reading about 4 or 5 years ago, he implemented a community policing strategy, you know, straight from the Obama administration. And we watched our crime decrease over 30%. We watched better relationships with Black and Brown residents and the police. So I think that was one area that we started to focus on improvement.
And what were some of the tenets of that plan that the new chief implemented, if you know?
To be honest, you know, we had some past practices that, you know, there was some targeting. There were random checkpoints for different folks. We are a growing Latino community, so there were concerns from that community as well about administrations working with ICE and other authorities. I think our chief put a program in place that really allowed officers to get out of their cars and meet people. It allowed them to, you know, host community events, you know, with water ice and being in the schools. Most importantly, it became more of an open door policy for the chief, where he, you know, would allow residents from all walks of life to come in and share their concerns. So I would say more transparency and the community initiative that kind of done away with old practices.
And do you think that has actually, I mean, I know it all sounds good. Has it helped?
I think it has. You know, I worked as a youth football coach. You know, I worked in nonprofit centers. I've seen us become a more diversionary town and county, where in the past, you know, you would have kids being pushed into the detention centers at high numbers. So I've seen the shift in direction that we have become a much more diversionary, you know, community when it's about giving kids second chances and giving them opportunities to right their wrongs, especially when it's done at a young age or when it's, you know, done on a first-time basis. So I have seen a shift, not just politically, but with some of our policies in the community.
Nice. No, it's very important. Chief, I'm going to take it over to you for a second, if I could, Chief Medwid. And I guess I'm curious to know, you know, what kinds of things are going on in Lower Salford? Are there new policies in place? What are we doing to encourage transparency and, you know, keep people accountable and make sure that we have a good relationship between residents and the force?
There's a lot of things. Some of the more tangible things are statewide accreditation. When I arrived in Lower Salford in 1999, there was a movement statewide for accreditation, where the state will devise standards and the department has to create policies that satisfy that standard. Currently, I think there's about 125 standards, and one policy could satisfy 3, 4, 5 of those standards. But they wanted to raise all the ships, you know, with the same tide to improve the professionalism. One of the reasons that was so important in Pennsylvania is that there are roughly 17,000 police agencies in the country. What that means is most states get by with 200 or 300. Anybody want to hazard a guess for Pennsylvania? How many police departments do we have? Last count, about 1,250. About, because it changes all the time.
And that's because you've got your local, your regional, your state police,
well,
borough.
we have the same number of police departments for the most part as we do municipalities. Municipalities didn't set about to create 1,250 police departments. But because of the way Pennsylvania was founded, and there was a distrust of centralized government, all these municipalities are very small. Of those 1,250 police departments, half of them have 10 or fewer police officers. That can't be the most efficient way to do it. It just can't. There's so much duplication of effort. And when it comes to funding, how many counties are there in Pennsylvania?
Well, that one I know, 67.
Only 67. Imagine going from 1,250 to 67. Camden, especially in the last couple of weeks, Camden is getting a lot of airtime for the success that they've had the last few years going to a county police department.
Yeah.
More efficient, you can move officers where they're most needed. So, I mean, it sounds like a lot of statistics, but it's a real thing. The number of police departments is a real thing. Accreditation is trying to professionalize those 1,200, and it's a large task. It really is. We started like 2002, and we're accredited by 2004, and you are re-accredited every 3 years. So,
and how many full-time officers are there in Lower Salford?
19 in total. And in the Indian Valley, that's considered a relatively large police department. Because a lot of the departments, Souderton, Telford, have to rely on part-time officers. Budgetary reasons,
Right.
They need more officers on the weekend than they do during the week. So they have to supplement with part-time. Nature of the beast. Almost every borough is going to have to use. And again, you have boroughs, you have townships. It's just the way, this area was organized. Boroughs tend to be, hubs
Denser?
of industry, where a lot of the industries up and left, and you're just left with the communities that used to be all the employees through the industrial age. And this is how it became tougher to police a borough. It's just historical at some level. So being a part, unfortunately, like I said, we were, I think, the 20th department in the state to be accredited. We got on pretty early.
Which is good.
Yeah, but Montgomery County is probably overrepresented across the state for like the ratio of departments that are accredited. All those departments in the middle of the state, they say there's Pittsburgh on the west, Philly on the east, and everything in the middle is Alabama. Or they refer to it as Pennsylvania. It's getting those small departments on board. They even tried to bait the hook with radar. You know how many states in the country do not have radar for local police? Just Pennsylvania. I mean, there's a fear that it would be used for revenue enhancement as opposed to identifying a problem and then solving it.
I want to talk to you about that for a second, about identifying a problem and solving it.
They tried to say, all right, listen, you can have radar if you become accredited. It's too much work, and there's a cost associated with it. We have to pay $1,000 a year just to be a member, and I've suggested to them that maybe they should levy a $1,000 fine for the departments that aren't accredited. But there are reasons. Like I said, it does take up staffing hours. It's a lot of work, but when I came in, the policy manual needed to be updated. This movement was already, taking place in Pennsylvania. So for me, it was a no-brainer. And according to my officers, I'm getting a little bit better at those.
And Chief, I want to ask you about that, about allocating resources and putting people in the right positions. You know, one of the things we're hearing a lot of the discussion in the media right now is, you know, police officers are relied on to do too much. And I see this in my job as a defense attorney. You know, a call is for a mental health situation, but the cops are the ones that have to go out instead of a social worker, right? Because we don't have those kinds of agencies. All we have are police and fire and EMS, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess, you know, I'm curious what your take is on some kind of supplemental relationship like that. Have you seen that anywhere else in the country? I know Camden has worked a little bit with that, but has there been any discussion of that? Have you seen that anywhere?
It really depends on geography. In Lower Salford, I tell my officers they're going to have to be pretty good at almost everything. We don't have a homicide unit because we have a homicide about once every 20 years. That's me knocking on wood. We had one in 2014, just a devastating case in the whole area, you know, with 6 fatalities. So I don't need a homicide unit, but my officers have to be generalists. There are police departments that don't go to ambulance calls.
Right.
Mine never be that police department. We get there, my officers, I mean, when I started 100 years ago, they didn't really want you going to fire calls or ambulance calls because it wasn't police work. You know, I'm not preaching, but when I went to school for public safety, it was a very accidental revelation, because public safety focuses on police, fire, EMS, and emergency management. It forces you to zoom out a little, no pun intended, to see the big picture and approach it not just as police, but as public safety, or the term I like to use is peace officers, which we could use more of today.
Right.
So we get to the ambulance calls typically first. We get to a lot of fire calls typically first. So I want my officers trained in that as well. The mental health cases you referred to earlier, major part of our job. And we are not psychologists. I hope we get to speak about de-escalation later, but which my officers are trained in. But you know what? We have to be dot connectors. If we have the resources or know of the resources and we can get this information, we have a lot of people that we get to know. We have 16,000 residents, but we get to know a lot of them on a first name basis because of mental health issues. Montgomery County is blessed with excellent emergency services and staff that will come out and make personal welfare checks for if we call Building 50, Montgomery County Emergency Services, and we explain the situation. They say, well, a 302 is an involuntary commitment. If we think a person is going to be a danger to themselves or others because of the mental health behavior they're demonstrating, then we can forcibly take them. Typically, it's a family member who is just, you know, out of options, calls the police and said, look, you know, I think we're looking at some real potential for self-harm.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. I want to move on because I want to get Eddie's opinion on some of this. We're going to come back to you in a minute here. And I lost Eddie. There he is.
Yes.
Eddie, I want to get your input on this. You know, something that we've been hearing a lot lately is, why are we having police go to everything? And the Chief makes a good point, or a point, maybe you agree or disagree, it's a good point, that, you know, they get the call, right? And they're the ones that can get there the quickest, and they're trained to be generalists. I mean, some would say they shouldn't even be getting that call. And what are your thoughts, and what have you seen in your experience?
Well, you know, I had the pleasure when I lived in Philadelphia. I grew up in Philadelphia, and as a young attorney in Philadelphia, I was appointed by Mayor Rendell to the very first Philadelphia Police Advisory Commission. And I also I also was chair on the subcommittee for public information. So it was my job to kind of coordinate training between the commission board and the Philadelphia Police Department. And I will honestly say that being a police officer is a job that I don't think that I am capable of having, because police officer, in all honesty, they do have to make split-second decisions. And whereas if a mistake is made, we have the opportunity here, being in the office. I was a corporate attorney for over 20 years, but we had the opportunity, if a mistake was made, we could come, we could meet, and we can rectify. A police officer doesn't have that same affordability. When something happens, they have to make that split decision. And I think that is what's causing a lot of the problems that we are now seeing countrywide. One of the things that I did when I was at the Police Advisory Commission, in order for the board to get a better understanding of what police officers had to deal with, was to make sure that we went through some of the same training that those police officers went through. And it kind of opened up a lot of doors. And that was, oh my God, that was back in '95, I believe. And one of the things I was advocating for then was that police officers had to undergo some sort of training that had to do with de-escalating issues, and especially de-escalating issues within minority populations or people of color, especially African Americans. But I find that that is a systemic problem that has been around for African Americans since back in slavery, when during the Emancipation Proclamation, all right, you were free, African Americans didn't have anywhere to go. If you stayed in one place for more than 2 days, more than 48 hours, you were then arrested for loitering, and then then you were arrested, then part of that, of your paying restitution for that crime, was being placed back on the farm where you just got released from. And the officer or the people that enforced that were deputized by the states in order to enforce those laws. So I think systemically, it goes back to then, it has progressed up until today's time, where the police officer in urban African-American communities are not seen as, the friend of the community. And a lot of that has to do with, like I said, lack of training. And I advocate for that constantly, that community policing does work, but if you're not from that community, you don't know how to work it. And I think that and police officers, I find, at least let me say the Philadelphia Police Department, they were not receptive to citizen-based oversight in order to help make them a better police force. I grew up in West Philadelphia. My father was a minister, but he was very active in the civil rights movement. As a matter of fact, Leon Sullivan, Cecil B. Moore were at our house all the time when it came to desegregating the Girard College. He was very active in that. So, and we came from Big Dam, South Carolina. That's where my family was, because where my family was, that's where we were the slave community for a larger plantation that dealt in dairy, tobacco, and cotton. So just giving you that background, I kind of learned that the police officers that policed those areas did not have the same experiences that coming up as an African American. They didn't know how to deal with African Americans, and that kind of built up the distrust. So I think that training is essential. I actually think that changing legislation and also policies, but that has to be done from a governmental level in order to be passed down to our police department. So I think that right now, this is the new Rosa Parks moment in America. We can come about and make changes now, or we can march, protest, and pray, and then repeat again when the next incident happens. I think right now, with this kind of a dialogue, we have to be available to have an open dialogue and an open and honest dialogue. And I believe our police department has to be a part of that discussion and conversation.
And so speaking of legislation, let's turn to Representative Malagari, who I just lost his screen. I'm gonna find him again in a second. There he is. So Steve, you heard Eddie talking about this needs to come to some extent from the top, from the government, which you are in. So tell us what efforts are being made at the Harrisburg level or have been getting stymied by the Republicans to make these kinds of changes.
Yeah, so
or what kind of changes are trying to be made, I should
well,
say.
so first off, we started session this week on Monday with members of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus taking over the rostrum and literally using civil discourse or civil disobedience, we'll say, in order to protest and say that Black Lives Matter and we absolutely need police reforms and substantial reforms within the state government, and also allowing for us to take action. So because of a news conference that was had in Philadelphia with members of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus and from the delegation of Philadelphia, they were able to have, from that conversation, the governor actually agree to creating a special prosecutorial unit and start going through some of the issues that they've addressed. On the state legislative end, we're hoping, this is the big hope, that 4 bills will be passed on out of committee on Monday in judiciary to address some of the issues that are facing our members of our Black community and trying to help with police reforms. All of those have not been finalized yet. The bill language hasn't been finalized, so I don't have an answer for you yet on what those exactly are. However, once that is finalized, it'll come before the Committee of Judiciary on Monday, and that will be the last thing that Speaker Turzai does before he resigns that day. That is his last day in office. So he wanted to make sure that he was able to bring those over his desk and make sure they get passed out of committee and onto the calendar. The question that remains is, will they be shepherded through to get a vote? And with him being gone, that may not happen. It depends on who the next speaker is and whether or not that individual will bring these through. As far as some of the details of the legislation, like I said, that hasn't been finalized yet, so I don't even want to mention what they might be because the language hasn't been there in its entirety. But I know there's talk about hiring reforms for police officers. They did mention a couple bills about PTSD and how to treat mental health. Also excessive use of force and uniform force codes. They want to try and make sure that they're not doing too excessive. They want to really, really concentrate on community policing efforts. And I know in our communities, we're really working hard to do that. And they're trying to explore more ways. And that's more on the local level that has to really be done. But if there's a way to incentivize transparency in policing and transparency in community policing, I think that can lead to some really good results. And trust within the community. The other part that they wanted to do is make sure that there's, I don't know if there's going to be funding yet for body cam help within our community police departments, but I know that to build transparency and also as a protective factor, not only for officers, but also for members of the community, body cams can be very, very helpful, especially in disputes. And that's one thing that could be brought forward to the state legislature as well. There's more to come on this. It was great to see the civil disobedience in action, and it was wonderful to stand there in solidarity with the members and asking for finally a conversation to happen. And that particular movement that they did moved the speaker so much to that he immediately met with them and listened to their concerns, legitimate concerns, and that they had to go to that extent just to move the needle a little bit. And
Right.
it was one of the better days that I've had so far, probably one of the most memorable ones that I will have in my career.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. I'm going to turn to Napoleon Nelson. Whoops. Who I just lost on the thing. There he is. People keep moving around. So Napoleon, thanks for joining us. So you just, congratulations, won a primary, right, for the 154th district. So congratulations. Where is that?
Thank you. The district is in Cheltenham, Jenkintown, and Springfield. And so we get all of those three municipalities in their entirety. We are not gerrymandered and kind of crazily drawn. It actually makes some sense here. We're just to the northwest of Philadelphia. It was a wonderful, hard-fought primary of ideas, of ideals, and with a tremendous slate of candidates. So we did come out ahead, and we're thrilled with that and the momentum for November. But at the same time, to be honest, winning this election and having this election now, just I immediately walk into kind of the heavy burdens of expectations of trying to figure out how to appropriately lead and represent our district in this time. And so I thank you for having me, and it's an acknowledgement that the work begins immediately.
Yeah, definitely. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, I know you're coming from the school board background, but what made you want to run for state rep? What are you bringing to the table here?
Sure. Well, so yes, I spent a significant amount of time here in Cheltenham on the school board, including as board president, and continuing to fight there to not only diversify our district and our administrative team, to fight for appropriate discipline practices, and really to continue to advance just the level of rigor that we're providing and the opportunities that we're providing our students. The Cheltenham School District is amazingly and wonderfully diverse, and in fact the community is as well. So I always argue that it is the largest, most diverse school district and municipality in the state. Again, Philadelphia is a beast in and of itself. Allegheny and kind of Pittsburgh is a beast in and of itself. But of the others, we've got probably about 56% of our students are African American. We've got a tremendous Jewish population that really helps to make sure that those two anchor the components of what Cheltenham is. But our diversity extends well beyond just those two kind of subsets. The district itself is just another wonderful district that has schools and that has communities that thrive on identity, their individual identities, as well as something that is collectively, to some degree, wonderfully democratic. And I appreciate being here with wonderful indivisible groups that you guys can appreciate that. We've got two indivisible groups within this district. For me personally, I was a Mount Airy guy. Went to Central High School and left the state for college, but came back and got involved in my school district in my community. Left there 3 years ago, and I'm now a trustee of the Montgomery County Community College. Have kind of taken that same approach to both academic excellence and opportunity and equity that we fought for in the school district in Cheltenham, and are bringing that to the work being done at the community college. So much of what we're doing, so much of what I hope and believe resonated with voters in our district, and certainly throughout the county and state, is an understanding and a dedication to investing in our children. We've got major problems that we're wrestling with. We had some wonderful candidates with wonderful and extensive backgrounds in environmental advocacy and in gun violence prevention advocacy, and working with trades and working with, just kind of those who are bringing all sorts of different economic opportunities and diversities onto the table. And our campaign really was one that said, we've got major problems, we've got major issues, and a major and critical avenue for addressing them is ensuring that we are arming the next generation.
So how does that play in? We're looking at a problem here that's really systemic racial injustice. I mean, that's what we're looking at. That's what we're seeing a symptom of, really, in everything we've been seeing lately and for hundreds of years. Tell me about, and I don't disagree, I agree 100%. How does the school and the education play into that, and how can we fix that? How can funding that appropriately and working in the education realm fix those things or help fix them?
Yeah, there are really three areas, right? So first and foremost, and you see it with education, and it plays itself out first in education, students really begin to understand who society sees them as around third or fourth grade. And if you looked at test scores, if you looked at discipline factors for students, you'll start to see, especially for African-American students in schools that are not predominantly African-American, you'll start to see those discipline factors jump through the roof. You'll start to see academic achievement begin to underperform academic potential around fourth and fifth grades, because that's when little kids, amazing little bright-eyed boys and girls start to look like somebody who might be physically imposing. And so we start to recognize that early. And so investing in those kids and investing in an understanding of bias and biased training, investing in how our community and specifically how teachers and educators and parents and look at a student who might be 5'10", 150 pounds as an 11-year-old. Understand that is an 11-year-old, that's somebody's baby. That starts in the school system, right? Second, the school to prison pipeline is a school to prison pipeline. So how we think about discipline and how we think about the engagement of our police force with our school districts to help enforce and infuse some level of cooperation and discipline, and while also investing in those students. That is a critical function of school boards and of our police force and of our community to say, we don't think that you need to call the police for this issue. And each of our districts really looks at this differently. Look at and check with your school district to understand not only what their discipline policy is, but also check to see how they are engaging with police officers. If they call the police for a fight that happens on the schoolyard, that means that they are abdicating their abilities as educators to handle what is, unfortunately, a relatively common aggressive behavior, a very normal educational perspective.
And in
right?
Cheltenham,
So make sure that we're breaking that up. And finally, the third piece that's vitally important that we talk a little bit about in this campaign that was something of a differentiator is through it all, I actually still need the police in my school system. I want them there not to police the students, but part of the solution for building that the police department of the future says that we need some of the students that are right now walking the halls of Cheltenham School District to grow up to want to be police officers. We want them and need them to grow up to want to be educators and police officers and judges. And so part of investing in them and investing in the pipeline, culturally proficient, socially just police force means that we need to get them early and we need to get them while they're still in our school system. And so that's some of the real critical importance of having this conversation and infusing and always keeping our students in mind.
Yeah, no, I like the approach. I'm going to turn to one of our other school board members on the call. We have Jill Dennin, who's running for state representative in the 147th district, and Jill's also a member. She's currently on the school board in Boyertown. So, Jill, I want to know. Well, first of all, thank you for joining us, and I want to know what your thoughts are on how the education piece plays into this racial inequity, the systemic racism that we see in this country and we've seen for 200 plus years, and how we can fix it.
Yeah, so yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy that we're having this conversation. I actually want to personally congratulate Napoleon. We haven't met in person yet, but I was, super excited to hear. I've been following the campaign in that legislative district, so I'm looking forward to hopefully working with you in Harrisburg if I win as well. So yes, I am on the Boyertown School Board, and it is, I have to say that this week has been a little depressing for me. The Boyertown School Board, we have our first ever Black superintendent, and as a matter of fact, when he first moved up here, his daughter was in the Cheltenham Public School. And when we had this incident in Boyertown, where I'm on the school board, we obviously wanted to put out a statement, and it's been 2 weeks and we still don't have a statement. Because unfortunately, I live in a community where there still is a tremendous amount of racism. Our school district is not diverse. We have a total of 2 Black teachers, and we have 90% Caucasian student body. So we could not get 5 people on our school board to say they would put out a statement or to agree what that statement would be. Several of those people on our school board were born and raised in Boyertown and are the 3rd or 4th generation. So what I have seen and what I have been pushing for the 7 years that I've been on the school board is that we need to educate our student body about diversity. We need to do a better job of addressing the issues of inequality, racial inequality, gender inequality. In our school district, when I moved here 25 years ago, I was absolutely horrified when I took my 2 toddlers at the time to the library and there was a KKK parade in the center of town. We still have an active KKK in Boyertown. When my son was in 6th grade at the elementary school and I was the PTO president, there was a family who moved in and a cross was burned on their lawn. And we had a huge coming together of the religious groups and all the people in the community. We're now a No Place for Hate school. We have a unity walk every year. And my general feeling is, when we talk about what can we do about this issue, from my perspective as a school board member and being very involved in the community and the educational part of our community, is that a lot of the problem of racial injustice and police brutality and systemic inequalities stems from the fact that we do not have an educated society. We have students in our school, believe it or not, who couldn't even tell you what the civil rights movement is about. They don't understand. They're coming from a position of slavery it wasn't that bad. The slaves were part of the family, and it was okay. And this is how they're being educated in their home, if they're even talking about the issue. And then what are we teaching them in our schools? And I have continually pushed to have these conversations in our schools, and we have not been able to push for those conversations. And this started, honestly, several years ago when there was a push legislatively and politically to have very conservative people on school boards to push an agenda of taking away books out of the school that would talk about slavery, that would talk about the civil rights movement. And that really has set Boyertown back several years because of some of these school board members who were trying to push this agenda. And
so as a state representative, I guess as a state representative, that's the new job, hopefully.
Yes.
What is the role of the state legislature in these issues?
Well, I
Or
mean,
is it just look, we got these small towns and some of them are going to be racist. What can we do from the higher up level to help with that?
well, I think it's important from a school board standpoint. Obviously, individual school districts, and Napoleon may or may not agree on this, that school districts are not big on tons of mandates. But I think that we can legislate certain things in curriculum. I know that they are talking now about a civic standard. Maybe we need an education standard. Maybe we need a standard that says that every school district will teach about diversity. I don't know, but I don't know how much you can legislate that. But I will say that from an education standpoint, we need, if we're going to truly have change in our society, it has to start with our kids who are sitting in the classrooms from that perspective. And I agree with Napoleon said about the unequal discipline of Black children and children of color in our school districts. And I went to a seminar on that, and I was really stunned about how we don't necessarily call on the female or call on the Black child, or how if there's an altercation, the Black child is 10 times more likely to be to get in trouble for that. So I think that although I'm really passionate that we need to start educating, that's something in my community that I feel that we need, because there is no diversity. But from a legislative perspective, I think that there's two pieces of it, right? There's the policing piece of it and police reform, and then there's just how are we going to have an educated group of students in our society, and there's a lot of different things in terms of it's not just about race, but it's also about economic equality. So we're looking at right now having to have cyber school, and we have students who do not have connectivity because they live in rural areas. They don't have in poor communities, they don't have the computers. So it's all, in my opinion, it's all really interconnected. But from a basic level, I think that it's education. And that's why I think even, having something like this is so important to educating people, because people, I think, and I'm one of those people, I felt I really understood a lot about the issues of race and different, inequalities. And then, I started educating myself, and I started talking to people, and I started reading books, and I saw the movie, The 13th Amendment. I mean, I think the 13th Amendment on Netflix should be a requirement in schools. I mean, honestly, that is it from a historic perspective. I think that people don't understand that, we've had 400 years of slavery, and we had the emancipation of the slaves, and literally nothing good happened for 100 years. So I think that those types of historical things, if you don't understand the problem and you're not educated on the problem, I don't see how you can be a force of someone who's going to then fix the problem.
I agree. Now, it's well said. Hakim, I want to turn to you for a minute here. We've talked a little bit about, and thanks, Joe, and we're going to come back to you in a bit here. We talked a little bit here about what we can do from a school standpoint and from a legislative standpoint. I want to know, someone with council experience at the very local level, what should we be talking to our local council people about? How can, the local elected officials impact this societal injustice that we're seeing?
I'm glad. Yeah, I apologize for my back and forth. I have 2 under 2, and it's been a pretty roller coaster today. But
I figured I would just throw you a softball. How does local government fix racism? How can we sort it out?
I think what's happening right now throughout Montgomery County is a prime example. You're seeing people from all walks of Montgomery County. When I went on Facebook and I saw over 200 people marching down the main street in Boyertown, that was moving to me. We all know stigmas, and we all have our stigmas. So I think that's the start. I spent 5 years as a truancy officer with Norristown School District, so I did see disproportionate truancy fines go to families of color and families who didn't have as much representation. And I've seen more excused absences and more, I've seen less lenience. I've seen more leniency in the courts on families, on white families. So I have seen that systemically as well in the district courts and sometimes in the dependency courts. I think as local leaders, we have to speak out. Sometimes we get our hands slapped. Sometimes it's uncomfortable calling each other out. We have to listen to the residents and sometimes let them lead. There's a lot of protests. There's a lot of movements happening right now that I've seen. I've seen more work towards policy happen in the last, maybe 20 days than I've seen ever. So I would say as a local elected leader, we have to step outside of our comfort zones. We have to be willing to piss people off and not be afraid of losing your seat the next time around, or denounce something publicly and not be afraid of, maybe you represent a purple area and you're afraid you may lose those votes. I think we really have to, prime example, I see Joe Webster has been a really strong progressive, and he has really been moving the needle, and in the statement he put out, it was awesome. So I hope to see behind that statement, forward thinking. So, I hope that answers your question, but
it absolutely does. And I'm going to move, speaking of, people that are going outside their comfort zone a little bit, I want to turn to Veronica and let me, so
better.
Yeah, a little bit better. And, so you organized this march protest, 1,100 people. Time out on that. Is that a Pitt thing behind you? Did you go to University of Pittsburgh?
Oh, I'm in my brother's room because the router's in freshman he just finished his freshman year at Pitt.
Oh, okay. All right. My wife and I are both Pitt grads, so
tell him.
Yeah, you have to let him know. But it sounds like, like so many other people, myself, and I'm assuming most of the people on this call, you saw what was happening in Minneapolis and in other cities and were moved. And I want to know, someone that's doing this, that's out there organizing these things, what's going to keep you engaged? What's going to keep you fighting? What does that feel like?
So that's something that I really have been trying to work hard on, is keeping the momentum going, because before the protest, I was feeling disappointed in Souderton. I did not expect a turnout of 1,000 plus. So I was really moved even more after the turnout of the protest. So I did start a Facebook group that is called What's Next Souderton. And surprisingly, there's like close to 400 members in the group, and it's very active. A lot of people are posting different articles that they're reading, posting different books that they're reading, posting different movies that they're watching, but they're also asking questions. And I think that's the big step as well, is keeping the conversation going. So the protest and the momentum there is great. However, I think it's the conversations that are happening at home, in school, in our local government, things like that. Those are the big steps that help to keep the ball rolling, because unless we're having those open, honest discussions, we're marching then because we're bored and we're in a pandemic, or we're marching because everybody else is doing it. So I think keeping the conversation alive and having these difficult discussions and having these Zoom meetings and things like that are the biggest step we can take as a community to make sure everybody's on the same page. Everybody knows what's going on and why we're where we are at right now.
And so what is next in Souderton specifically? Are there other marches planned, other demonstrations, anything up your sleeve?
It's so funny because I'm like so overwhelmed still. I am just a small town girl who.
Uh-oh. We lost you at small town girl. Did you say something about living in a lonely world?
Not living in a lonely world, just like acting on pure emotion, trying to figure out how I can make my voice heard. But I've gotten in touch with Harry Boardman. He owns Exhibit B, I believe it's called, in Souderton. It's an art gallery. He wants to do an art show showcasing Black and brown artists, not only in Souderton, but in the Philadelphia area and things like that. So more news to come on that. which would be super exciting if we get things going, and with the pandemic, we can make it all work out. But other than that, I'm still trying to educate myself. I don't have any other marches planned right now. However, I'm trying to make my way to other local marches and support other small communities in the surrounding area. So I would recommend that if anybody is on this Zoom call, join What's Next Souderton. I will admit you and we can keep the conversation going. But I think as of right now, I don't want to be the only one making moves either. I think I helped to get it started, but I think there's a lot of other people in the community that have come to me with ideas that I'm kind of trying to push them, you know, use your voice. I can't be the only one to do it for everybody. So we'll see. I think there are some exciting things to come, but nothing is set in stone yet.
All right, well, I'm very, very happy that you've done this, very proud of what you've done so far, and
Thank
we're going to
you.
keep an eye on it. We're all going to join What's Next Souderton. And
Thank you.
I'm going to come back to you again here, so, but thank you for that. I'm going to move to Eddie. Let me just get here. And Eddie, you know, you talked a little bit about your family's history with the civil rights movement, and there's been a lot of comparison to the 60s in today's movement. And I'm curious what your thoughts are, or your suggestions, opinions on keeping that passion. You know, people watch this video, or maybe they haven't, but many people who have, and there's a visceral reaction to that. But that visceral reaction fades, and you march, and people are fired up, and then it's easy to go about your life and kind of forget about it. So how do we keep that going? How do we keep that passion alive so that real change happens?
Well, we keep that passion alive with young people like Veronica. You have to remember, during the civil rights movement, the people that really did the frontline work, that were actually doing the traveling, changing laws and legislations, were high school, college, and middle school students. Those were the freedom riders that were risking their lives on a daily basis to change the civil rights movement. So we need to keep this. First of all, we need to really embrace our young people and start bringing out leaders like Veronica right now in order to keep this movement going. And a big thing systemically that has to change is the education of our young people concerning the civil rights movement and going back to slavery. I think that our school district, it should be required. And I believe that, as a matter of fact, Steve McCarter, who Napoleon will be replacing as our new state rep, he had legislation where it was mandatory to teach the Holocaust, and now so in Montgomery County is now mandatory learning that they learn about the Holocaust. The same thing should be done for African American studies, going back to the Middle Passage. I think what prohibits people from becoming involved in that is that America is ashamed of its past. If you remember, we had the minstrel shows and the those movies that kind of showed slavery, like Gone with the Wind, as everybody was happy, we were go-lucky. But that was not such the case. It wasn't until Roots came in the mid-70s that America saw slavery for the atrocity that it was. So we really need to start bringing that back in. Well, we need to bring that teachings back into the school districts so that young people can learn that this wasn't an atrocity. And that's not just for our white citizens, but also for our children. Our children need to know their history. My father used to always teach me that to get where you're going, you got to know where you came from. So history was always a strong passion of his. So I would strongly suggest, and especially to our leaders and to our new leaders that are about to take office, that we have to stop talking about what's in our heart and start talking about how to change policy. And policy changes at the state level that affects those locally is where it has to start. So I think that's where the change comes: education, and also the continuation, but not just continuing dialogue. Talking about this is all fine, well and good. We have to actually start putting what we preach into practice.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. I'm going to move back to the chief, Medwid. There he is. And Chief, one of the things we've heard, in the news when you listen to the talking heads is many departments have tried reforms. There have been chiefs that have tried to get rid of unruly officers who have histories of inappropriate behavior. And there's that friction with the police unions. And I do municipal work as an attorney. I'm familiar with this issue, but a lot of people probably aren't, and how that works. And can you explain a little bit about, when we hear those news stories, what that means and how that works at the local level?
Yes. I think before trying to root out the bad officers, I just wanted to, before I forget, that for me and my colleagues, where the rubber meets the road is our hiring process in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Because the real root of hiring for me is access. And as a second-class township, the good news is that I have some latitude on hiring processes. I do not give a written test. A written test measures your performance for 1 hour. We use a more private sector resume application review. We do not charge anybody to be a member of that process, to get involved.
Are other departments charging people to apply?
Sure.
Oh,
it's pretty
okay.
common. It could be nominal, but I mean, if it is nominal, why charge it all? Just
right
where I'm coming from. About a year ago, the chiefs in my area, well, from my area all the way down to Upper Dublin, were invited by the Ambler NAACP, the director at the time, the president of that chapter was Carmina Taylor. She brought us in. She lured us with her world-renowned jambalaya, and she had us. And we had some very productive, blunt discussions about recruitment, about hiring, and we worked on a plan. She's not the president right now, but I hope those talks continue, because it literally put us all at the same table. We told Carmina what our issues were, to some extent how a civil service process, which was created to make the whole process fair, and can make it cumbersome. Like I said, I have over the years evolved to this private sector selection process, because it's one of the more difficult jobs I have, but probably the most important job is finding the right people in the first place. I think you're seeing people get away from, show me somebody who's already been a police officer, because it'll be easier to get them up and running. And what you've seen is really a real sea change, a shift to find people who are mature, who have, an ethical approach to life. They're good communicators. We can teach them the police stuff. If they're going to be around 25, 30 years, we can teach them that. Because if they've been in the military, if they've been in another police department, the only advantage that gives me is that I have another body of work that I can examine. Just being a cop doesn't mean you are a good cop. And we're pretty thorough about that. Hopefully, finally getting around to your question, rooting out bad officers, and I say bad, and it could be something, an emotional issue. PTSD is a huge issue in law enforcement now. So because of years and years of seeing the worst of people, and again, you wouldn't think in Harville that was the issue, but the more urban areas, they see more every day. you know, like the U.S. mail is just an avalanche. But there, you know, there are crimes of the mind and crimes of the heart, and we can try to fix. We do a lot of counseling. You know, if there's a crime of the mind and that we can fix it, but if there's a crime of the heart, that to me is a major red flag. And you know, you can't just say, well, it's hard to discipline a bad cop, so let's sweep that under the rug. You just can't. I mean, it's painful, but it's mission critical.
Right.
You have to get the bad officers out, and you can't be, you know, soften them off to the town next door. And you used to see a fair amount of that. And really, that's communication between my colleagues and I to make sure that doesn't happen. But
so when you were talking about that conversation with the NAACP and Carmina, I thought that was very interesting. And you know, we're kind of at this kind of moment where we need to have more of those conversations. So how does that conversation, in your view, what does that conversation look like over the next weeks, months, years, you know, regarding what is essentially a systemic issue? You know, how do our local forces interact better with their communities or adjoining communities to become part of the team, so we're all on one page here? What do you think that looks like?
I hate to keep going back to history, but as Eddie said, you can't ignore your history. You know, when you look at the principles of Robert Peel, you know, the police are the people and the people are the police. We should not be, you know, carpetbaggers. We should not be, you know, a hired gun. We should be ingrained in the community to get that level of trust. If you don't have the trust, you don't have the people. It's not going to work. So what we started with Carmina was, this is really nuts and bolts. You know, there was some philosophy thrown about, but it's really the nuts and bolts. That I don't know a single police officer in Montgomery County that doesn't want their police agency to reflect their community. But, you know, I don't have a race box on my application. You know, there's certain, I don't ask age. I can only ask, will you be 21 as of this date? And I'm fine with that. We take an application that's colorblind, and we're interviewing people, you know, like I said, you know, to get the right people. And what I'm asking, because I can't do it by myself, and what we tell Carmina is that you are the link to, you know, your group. For her, it's African American, but whether it's African American, if it's Asian, if it's brown, if it's yellow, we need those links. Carmina agreed to be that link. Every time we're going to hire, some agencies in Montgomery County hire together as a consortium. Some do it on their own. Everybody's got different rules. This is very confusing profession to get into. You know, because people coming out of college, or they're coming out of the military, they're coming out of high school, that they don't understand it. Everybody's hiring differently, and that speaks to that, you know, municipal, you know, the 1,250 agency. We didn't create it, but I'm not complaining. It's just the beast that was created, and we're trying to tame it. So we can let Carmina know, if we have one person we can go to. She's the president was the president of the Ambler NAACP. Then she has the built-in connections. You know, I mean, you know, most of the departments have an African-American officer who can come to a job fair. And we were going to create that, and it was going to be in Penland Park. Well, it wouldn't have happened with the pandemic, but these were great things that she was starting. And that's what we need. Just like I said, nuts and bolts, things like that, that we have somebody we can go to, and we just say, look, we are starting our hiring process. I have 4 officers that are going to be retiring soon, but because of the pandemic, because of the financial burden, that the pandemic is putting on municipalities because of earned income tax. I mean, I didn't go
Right.
to school for any of this stuff. I mean, I'm learning on the fly here. Earned income tax, guess what? Your budgets are tough. I know defunding is a big issue this month, but the emails that got me the invitation to this meeting, most of them were talking about the body-worn cameras. Very expensive proposition, even for a small police department. Somewhat wild range, $30,000 to $50,000. I can't buy uniforms because of the pandemic. The money will not be coming in, so every expense is being reviewed. You know,
One more reason, I guess, to evaluate more of a regional or county-wide system to kind of defer some of those costs or lower them, you know, per capita.
Well, yeah, there would be some financial advantage to reducing the duplication, but that's the whole hiring thing. You know, that's really what's keeping it front burner for police chiefs. You know, with everything that's going in the world today, that we are taking the right approach to hiring, and and having those community contacts. So I mean,
Yeah.
I put it out there. You know, I'm not hard to find. I don't have an unlisted phone number yet, and you know, I need people to reach out to me. It's a two-way communication. I mean, I was disappointed to see that I was listed as a guest speaker. I was hoping to be a guest listener because my wife has suggested that I learn more when my lips aren't moving.
Well, I'll let you listen a little bit. I'm going to move to Representative Malagari here, and I want to know why his screen keeps moving on my screen. There he is, and I want to know. You know, we've heard tonight from activists and politicians and police, and I want to know what we do next. In your opinion, what are the next steps to chip away at our societal injustices that we're seeing?
Well, next, I mean, you can only legislate so far. So you can only do so much through legislation in order to help. But it takes a lot of education too. I think it takes a lot of education within families, within communities, within schools. We need to learn about African American history. We need to learn about all of the history. We need to learn about the systems that were put in place that are now the systems that really kept people from getting ahead in this world, and especially Black and brown people, especially Black people. And I think we have to come to that realization. People that look just like me need to really start talking, saying the system wasn't set up for everyone to succeed initially. It was set up for those literally who look like me to succeed. Why? Because that's how it started. So we have to really talk about the systemic racism that has happened in our past. We have to own it first and understand it. If we don't know what it looks like, how can you see it? So if you have to recognize it first, and then start building upon that and start trying to find the ways in which we can actually make the system equitable. It's about equity. And we need to make sure that we work toward that. So I think legislatively we have things that we can do within police work and also within potentially education, but this isn't about, police being bad. No, not at all. No, we have great police officers in our communities, and the chief actually talked about that, how we're working with community policing. We're working to try and build those relationships up. And yes, body cameras are going to be very expensive. That's why it's something that would have to be budgeted, and there needs to be a concerted effort on the state level to help communities out with that. I think furthermore, it's just building those relationships within the communities and building that trust among all people. And I think once you build in those foundational once you build that foundation, your society is going to be much better after that, much stronger. So I think we have a long way to go, but of course we do. It's going to take work, it's going to take effort, and it's going to take us, understanding what we need to do. But I'm hopeful that we will get there. I think finally we're able to identify areas that need a lot of improvement, and that's the first step in trying to make anything better.
I like it. I like it. Let me move to Napoleon here. Spotlight you. There you go. All right, perfect. So, and before we jump into it here, if anyone has questions, we're going to take a couple of minutes after I talk to Napoleon a little bit to maybe ask some answer. Well, I'm not going to answer. I'll ask. You ask. I'll pass them on. You guys know what I mean. Post your questions in the chat. So, in your mind, what are our next steps? We're marching in the streets. We're chanting Black Lives Matter, and we are showing up. People are pissed. What do we do with it? What are like the concrete steps that need to happen next?
Yeah, thank you for that. So so I talked about the burden of expectations on the guy who just made it through the primary, right?
Yeah.
So I think one of the things we need to acknowledge is that there are what we're realizing now, what we're fighting against now, hasn't been for lack of champion, right? So when the bills are proposed and potentially voted on Monday, those aren't the first times that those bills have been brought up, right? So the argument, the work that is happening now, there have been champions who've been calling for some of these actions for some time. What we need to continue to do is have this collective voice that we have now. It needs to be sustained, right? So Veronica set up a march a month from now, right? And just put it on people's calendars and allow people to plan for it, because a march that's happening this weekend, you get the folks who are available this weekend. But if we make it a month from now, it does two things, right? One, it allows more people to plan for it. But two, it means that a month from now, we talk about this again, because what's going to happen is it's going to come out of the news cycle. We're going to forget about this until the next time somebody can't breathe. And then we're going to realize and remember how angry we are. It happens over and over and over again. So we need to make sure that we do that. So we, within my campaign, we had a great conversation on Tuesday where we actually looked at and itemized some of the major pieces of work that we need to investigate and continue to push. Some of the things that we know we're going to continue to spotlight, and I'll even mention some of them today. Right now, the way we approach electing judges is great. The way we approach retaining judges after their first term has completed is very poor, right? So we need to make sure that we keep a spotlight on some of those systemic issues that we have with how we're looking at our democratic process. We need to also challenge, certain portions of the law. One of the things that many folks talk about are, we don't need to defund the police, but what we do need to do is we need to ensure that we have methods of accountability. Right now, police have significant immunities that they get to realize in defense of their actions. Even legislators, as an elected official, Rep. Malagari can say whatever he wants right now about an individual or an organization. We have commissioners who can call, Black Lives Matter protest, left-wing, domestic terrorists, and they're immune from prosecution. They're immune from being charged for slander just because of the way our court system is structured, right? When we think about what's next, what we ought to do is realize that it's not the police that's the problem. It's their institutionally racist or oppressive streams within many of our institutions that we need to identify, dissect, and then almost take a scalpel to them and say, how do we cut this out? How do we stop this process from happening? And again, we need to do it in a way that's organized now and that's sustaining, so we can have an update next month and so that we can talk about it again 4 months from now. And we need to make sure that that organized effort has the local expertise around it that says, this is a passion of mine professionally and personally. There's some great work that's being done on community policing. One of the things we're looking at is what's happening in Chelsea, Massachusetts with their hub model. Everybody look at it, look it up. It's great work. Some of it is kind of responsive to President Obama, called out several years ago in his
I'm sorry, you said that's Chelsea, Massachusetts?
Chelsea, Massachusetts. It's their hub model for community policing. And what it effectively does is it makes the police officers and the police department a little bit more proactive and involved in just kind of ensuring that the social safety is being addressed first and foremost. They're important pieces and bodies of work that's happening throughout this country. They're wonderful leaders that are already stepping up to do this. What we haven't yet done is organize the support and organize the levels of effort that sustains that work, and that really tries to, again, take that scalpel or that pen to not the institution, but the racist and oppressive institutional strands within them. That's what we need to do. That's what I will continue to do, both here in the community and hopefully in Harrisburg. But you know, for everyone, it's bring this back up, put it on your calendar for a month from now, and ask all the people that you see working on this now, remind yourself to bring it up a month from now. And then remind yourself again to bring it up with your chief of police or your school superintendents 3 months from now. Because in order for this to really work, we have to sustain it beyond the news cycle.
Agreed. And we're gonna end here with Hakim. Hakim, I know you had some further thoughts on what we've been talking about here. Let me throw it at me.
Yep, yeah, appreciate it. So speakers have touched on a lot of it, but I was jotting some things down as people were talking. And it's reality is that we don't all start on the same playing field. If you're from here in Montgomery County and you grew up here and you know the dynamics, we all don't start on the same playing field. We all don't have, you know, aunts and uncles or people in high places that will, you know, give you a hand. But I have seen across the nation, there's things happening to make the playing field more level. There's colleges that are now starting to readjust their SAT and entry requirements, which can be socially biased and it can really affect students of color. Police departments, as Chief mentioned, I know our department eliminated the Act 120 fee. It's a several $1,000s fee that most officers may have to incur to become a police officer. And many of these young guys coming out of college, if we are trying to recruit minorities and folks who are from a more disadvantaged background, we're trying to help alleviate some of those obstacles. Working in education, I've seen many African-American and Latino educators walk away from teaching simply because they couldn't pass the praxis exam, or the cost of it would continue to be a burden, when they're trying to maybe raise kids and raise a family. And I think another example is that nepotism is at an all-time high in our institutions. And like I say, you only know this when you live and you grow up and you work somewhere. All you got to do is look at the last name. All you got to do is find out who's married to who. There's a lot of nepotism in our institutions, which really it leaves great folks out of the opportunity. So I think, like I said earlier, these are all uncomfortable topics, and they're all uncomfortable things to bring up when you sit in a position of power. But those are the decisions that have to be made. So, we are voted in by the people. It sounds cliche-ish, but you got to do right by them in those areas.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to just take a couple speakers we haven't heard from in a little bit, just for 60 seconds each. I know we're running a little bit over, but I'm going to jump over to Jill Dennin here. She is over where on my screen? I just got to find her. Jill, you can start talking and then I'll find you. But there you are.
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that the protests have been great, and I've been to several of them, and I was at the one in Boyertown, and everyone was very happy to see that Boyertown had a protest. But a little bit of my fear is just like some other speakers have said, is that everything is on a 2-week news cycle. So I think that this can't just go away. It's kind of like the whole gun issue. There's a school shooting and everybody's all hyped up, and even the president, everybody says, oh, well, we're going to do something, and then nothing happens. So when we talk about legislative priorities from the state level to the national level, I know that the Democratic caucus is talking at the national level. But unfortunately, you know, the cynical part of me says nothing's going to happen with that because it's never going to get through the Senate and it's never going to get, you know, to the desk of a governor or a president. So I think that we need all of us who deeply care about this issue, in addition to continuing to have difficult conversations, we also need to keep it in the forefront politically as well, because we all know that if we don't have the right people at the legislative level to actually bring those legislative priorities to the table, nothing is going to happen. And I do think that, yes, you cannot legislate your way out of some problems, but there are definitely some legislative things that we can do. And when we talk about defunding the police, I can't tell you how many people I have talked to, you know, my age and older, who have said to me, oh my gosh, now they radical want to defund the police. People don't even understand what that means. It doesn't mean getting rid of police departments and having anarchy. It means it means moving resources from police departments to other community organizations, and not you know, giving them more rubber bullets or more, you know, helmets or more weapons. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about defunding in one aspect of defunding the police.
Right. No, I appreciate it. I think Eddie, let me just get to you here. There you are. Eddie, I think you have an event coming up. Let me hear about it. What's going on?
Yes, it's upcoming Saturday. I partnered with the Multicultural Parents Association of Springfield Township School District, and we are going to have a protest sit-in. It's going to be held at Cisco Park in Montgomery County. That's located at Paper Mill Road and Montgomery Street. It's right in front of, or right in back of, the Philmont Christian Academy. We'll be there Saturday for no longer than an hour and a half. We're going to open up our program with prayer from Christian, Jewish, and Muslim religious leaders. We're going to have a couple of speakers, predominantly from our school district, our young people from our school district. And I think Congresswoman Madeline Dean will also be there, in addition to our county commissioners, Val Arkush and Ken Lawrence, to address the issue of Commissioner Gale here, the racist statement that he put out. And then we will close the event with kneeling for 8 minutes and 46 seconds in honor of George Floyd, where the officer had his knee on his neck. And basically that is just going to be symbolic that we are looking for change within our community, peaceful change that can come about with having conversations. And we don't want to reach people like you, that everyone that is on this particular Zoom conference. I believe that the people on this conference, they get it. They know what it is. It's those people that are outside of their comfort zone about joining conversations like those are the people that we have to meet. And once again, just thank you so very much for allowing me to be a part of this fantastic conversation. I think this community, our community in Montgomery County and the surrounding community, needs to have more of this, and make sure that we can get those individuals that are not thinking like you, just get them to join the conversation. So hopefully we can get them to just realize that it's just a matter of being treated. Everyone just wants to be treated just like you want to be treated. Once again, thank you so very much.
Thank you, Eddie. And thanks for everyone. We had Napoleon, we had Eddie Graham, we had Hakim Jones, Chief Medwid, Veronica Moeller, Jill Dennin, Representative Malagari. Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you to everyone that came out. This is one of our best turnouts. We'll be back next month, and we're going to be talking about that Chelsea, Massachusetts hub model. Actually, that's the discussion. So stay tuned for that. Check out the Facebook, Indivisible Hope. And anyone that has events, if you want to send those to our Facebook page, then we will post those and share those. So hopefully we'll see everyone this Saturday and Sunday at one of these protests. Stay safe and have a good night. Thank you.